Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia Vigilantes, the manga series. And this week I'm reviewing the episode titled Glass Sky. And we kick off this review, as we always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives and the headline positives. The big things I'm discussing over the course of this review. I thought the action was solid, I loved the humour, and I like the ominous ending. Now, I will just say is that this review is recorded shortly after the previous one. I think it's been about an hour or so since I did that, so if there was any feedback or any messages regarding the previous review, they're not going to be referred to in this episode. They will be mentioned in Comment Corner because I record Comment Corner a few days after the previous episode goes out. So you will get your comments read, but if there's anything like I really should know for this episode, sorry, I'm not going to be referring to it until maybe Comment Corner comes along. But nonetheless, Here we are with this week's review. Here we are at the final episode of this volume, and it's the one that sets up for the grim, nasty, and darker things later on. Ooh. But of course, we'll discuss those things when we get towards the end of this particular review. This is an episode that is designed to, well, in my opinion, it's more about trying to sell a vibe than necessarily is about selling a story or developing character. You may disagree with me, by all means let me know in the comment section down below. But this is one that it has a very light, bright vibe to it, much as the previous episodes themselves had. Even though there was a dark, well, not a dark, but there was more of a serious tone to them. This one feels a lot more like more of a fun, knockabout adventure kind of thing. This, of course, isn't to say that the previous episodes, like I say, were just laugh-a-minute episodes of fun and adventure. But this is the moment, as I say, where things are going to start taking a very dark turn from here on out. So, from a certain point of view, this is like our last gasp of sunshine before the darker stuff comes along. But like I say, I think that this is an episode that's more about selling a vibe than necessarily about selling character or developing character or the situation more broadly in a story point of view. Now, this is an episode where our heroes are back at UA for more training. Their work placement thing has finished, or this is just a day when they're at school. Don't really know the logistics of it. Really doesn't matter, but here we are with them back again for some more combat training. Now it's time for some 2v2 action. Though in practice, given what happens in the action sequence, it's more like 2 versus 1, which I will admit, the whole fight sequence itself, whilst I do think it's very well drawn, I think it is brilliant, spectacular action. I think the whole thing itself is a little bit anticlimactic. Because, I mean, yeah, we knew who was going to win because of the nature of the stakes here. But I do feel as though the emotional stakes and the weight of them weren't quite hit for me, because this is an episode that ultimately the big central conflict is about two of our lead characters fighting the school bully, beating them back. They are the nasty bad guy, they're the all-round bratty horrible person. They're like Bakugo if they never had any kind of character development. So the emotional stakes of this is, maybe if we beat this guy, we'll finally get them off our backs. And it all just kind of fizzles out, and I think that's a little bit more due to the pacing and the length of the action sequence itself. I apologise that it sounds as though I'm getting to the negatives very prematurely, but we'll discuss that kind of stuff later on. But as I say, this is an episode with some very solid action, and it is just great to see, even if I was expecting more. I mean, as I started to read this episode, I was expecting the fight would ultimately be the thrust of the episode, and whilst the episode itself ultimately goes in the direction that I thought it would do, I thought that more of the episode would be centered around the fight, and then we'd have the bit towards the end of the episode, like we get towards the end of this episode, where everyone's patting themselves on the back and talking about their dreams for the future, so that we get the big gut punch when we get the hints of the greater evil later on. Yes, it does all that stuff, but with a short action sequence, though the action sequence itself is still solid. The artwork, as usual, is great. No criticism there. Brilliant. Yes, I do have an issue with the fact that you have the black background, black borders, but that's just the way that it is. I do think it does strangle some of the visual flair out of all of this, but nonetheless, the fight itself is brilliant. I really love seeing Oboro fighting. We've not really seen that much of him as a fighter or as a hero. They've spent a lot of time establishing that this guy is a bloody nice bloke, but not much as really of a fighter. And yes, you can kind of guess what kind of fighter he is, given what we've seen of him in the past, given his design, given that he has his design has these nods to Sun Wukong, so you understand, okay, that's the way that he's going to be. He's going to be flying around and whacking people with his whopping great big stick. great, good. And actually getting to see that is great. And seeing how he works with Eraserhead, again, great. Seeing the two of them work together, seeing Eraserhead having a partnership that really does work with his quirk at this point in the story, because whilst his quirk is impressive, as established in previous episodes, he doesn't really have the ability to end a fight. He can pause a fight, he can reduce it, but that's about it. Oboro is a very fast, fleet-footed fighter. Well, fleet-clouded, but you get the idea. The artwork is crisp, and I like the fact that they are going up against a fighter whose strength and powers are ultimately in a different realm to them. They are someone who, even if they didn't have their flashy powers, they look big and strong enough that they could beat this shit out the pair of them easily. But hey, at the end of the day, he doesn't get a chance to do that because Oboro can just whack him with his stick and it's perfectly fine. I mean, I will be honest, this feels like it is, like I say, a 2-on-1 kind of fight, because Present Might doesn't really do much of a muchness here. I understand that he's reluctant to really get into this, because he doesn't really have a dog in this fight. Yes, he does, because if he loses this, then it means he can't wear his sunglasses anymore. But if he wins it, then it means his friends can't wear their goggles, because the flashy bad guy, hero, student guy is really butthurt at the fact that someone else has something on their eyes. I mean, I suppose this really does underline just how differently characters in this series act versus how I did it around that age. Because had I been in either Oboro's or Eraserhead's shoes and he'd have said something like that to me, I'd have just turned to him and say, the goggles are equipment, they're not a fashion statement, we're not trying to creep your style, you bellend. And it's about at that moment I get my ass kicked, as usually would happen when I said those kind of things to beat people who were bigger and stronger for me. But hey, I will be honest, this might be a shorter review because, as I say, I think that a lot of this is about selling a vibe than necessarily selling a story or developing the characters. This is our last gasp of light and sunshine before things get seriously dark after here on out. This is the last moment of fun before things get very miserable, and I will be honest, a lot of what works in this episode gets into it just works territory. I'm always reluctant as to evoke that, but sometimes things just work to such a degree that it's hard to really articulate why they work. I suppose this is why reviews are overly negative, tend to have more material to talk about, because you can really get into detail on that stuff. But regardless, this is an episode which for me is less about telling a story or developing characters, but is more about telling a vibe, showing a vibe. For these characters in their life right now, this is business as usual. They're going to school, they're going to class, they're having run-ins with bullies, a little bit of fun banter with their friends. Fine, this is just an episode in their life. This is, if this was its own anime series, an episode which would be largely considered filler, given how it's all put together. But at the end of the day, it has all the thrills and spills that you come to and expect in an episode which is ultimately about characters overcoming a bully, or at least overcoming them for this week. With some funny humour thrown in for good measure. I love the little running gag about Oboro expanding the partnership seemingly every other page. It starts out with as a duo with him and Eraserhead, then the two of them and Present Mike as a trio, then they try to get Midnight involved so it can become a quartet, but she has other plans, which is illustrated by her picture, and her essentially saying, when I become a hero, I'm going to surround myself with twinks! Which is pretty much what she ends up doing when she becomes a bro hero anyway, so she got a wish. But it's all fun, and it all, again, like I say, it's about selling a vibe. It's about selling a tone in this particular moment. This is all about our heroes, like I say, having this last moment of peace, this last moment of sunshine, and then everything coming down, crashing around them in the next few episodes or so. Or maybe further on, depending on when exactly they want to actually have this big nightmare sequence kicking off. Despite Eraserhead's objections to everyone being so goofy and silly, he looks back at them wistfully and he smiles to himself. It shows he's starting to come out of his shell a little. It gives us a hint as to where things might have gone, had things gone as dark as he ended up going. It shows he's feeling genuinely comfortable around them. He has a very supportive friend group, and we get that very sweet little monologue from him towards the end of the episode, or at the end of the episode really, where he's talking about looking out to the future and how things seem so vast and open, and how he didn't really know where he was in his life at that moment, but you know, it felt like he's in a world of endless sunshine and a world of endless sunrises and sunsets, and that his future is bright and hopeful. And the tone of the monologue here is something that does echo things that Corolla said towards the end of the first season in the anime, and of course the prior volumes when we had that same kind of moment happening earlier on. It's the kind of thing that you would typically expect at the end of a season or the end of a volume. It's standard stuff. I don't want to undermine it, but this is the kind of thing that you would expect for a story like this, for a series like this, for this moment in a particular season. This is a moment where we have the wistful look back at all the fun that we had, all the fun that we could have, and then the dark reality that things aren't going to quite work out as we would hope them to do. And it all works great. Very well written, very touching, very moving. I found myself getting a little emotional thinking back to around when I was around this age of these characters and thinking about similar kind of things. The artwork, like I say, is brilliant. It has a very beautiful, optimistic look of things. It's particularly that final shot of Eraserhead. When we get into this more optimistic thing, we see less of the black with the dead space. And then when it's the end of it, you just get a little bit towards the side, which on the one hand shows that he's growing as a character, growing as a person, shows that he's seeing the future as being bright and hopeful. But you have that edge of darkness, showing that things aren't what they seem and things are only going to get worse, and that's what we see on the opposite page. And as I say, I think that all of that works well. It has a great vibe and energy to it. And then we get that flash forward to things going horribly wrong, and such a sharp shift in tone, and just that total juxtaposition between the vibe of what we had previously, which felt like the typical ending of any kind of superhero show, whether it be a superhero cartoon or anime. Our characters have had some fun times and they look hopeful to the future. And now we get the juxtaposition with that, with everything falling apart. It makes for a great gut punch moment. I will admit that it probably would have hit better with me had, I not known that things ultimately end up going the way that do because of the main series. But nonetheless, it does end up greater. It does play into that thing about the vibe, the shifting of the vibe, the shifting of the tone. We go from our characters being in a position of looking to endless summers to now realising the real world of hero work. It's not sunshine and rainbows. It's not fighting bad guys that look like anime villains of yesteryear. It's about fighting people that really do just want to see you bleed. And that's what they're going to end up seeing, no doubt, when things go downhill in the way that it will do in the upcoming episodes. And I'm interested to see where we go with that. The artwork for all of this, for this entire episode, was great, very well put together. And as I say, it's about selling a vibe, it's about selling a tone, it's about selling a moment. As I mentioned in the past, this is a case of, it really sells the idea that we're in a very different place right now. This feels like looking in at a different series, which is why I hope that when we get to this point in the anime, it has its own special intro sequence that makes it feel as though we are looking at a given stretch from a different TV series, like in Jujutsu Kaisen. I think it's in the second series where you get the flashback with Gojo and that, and the opening to that feels like something from an anime, a millennial-focused anime from the early to mid-2000s. I hope we get something similar to that, just get the vibe of it, but nonetheless, really well put together, really great. With that said, let's get into the negatives, and I just have to say that, as I mentioned previously, the big issue that I have is I think the fight sequence between Head, Oboro, and the flashy guy should have been longer. And I suppose had this been an episode in an anime, that would have been the length of the episode. That would be the majority of the meat of it, so that you then have the fun wrap-up towards the end of it. There's a part of me that's worried that fight sequence is ultimately going to be rather short. I suppose if they were being tricksy, they could maybe put this together as though it's like the Class 1A versus Class 1B thing from the main series. But I don't think they'd really pad things out to that extent, particularly bearing in mind we have zero interest or zero time spent to establish the other students apart from the ones that we see here. But they could easily pad it out a little bit more. Then you have the big ending stuff with what we see here. Just do that. I think that would work fantastically. But nonetheless, given at the very least the emotional stakes of these two characters that are finally going to stick one to their bully, I think that at the very least that should have been built out a lot more. That should have been built up a little bit more. But beyond that, that's not the point of the episode. Like, this is about them, like I say, it's about selling a vibe. It's about selling the feeling of this is the last bit of sunshine before everything turns around. This is the last day of summer before the real work begins when school starts. That's effectively the vibe they're trying to create here. And they do that. They do that very well. And to get into the overview, I think this is a fantastic episode for what it is. From a mechanical point of view, it does everything that it needs to and everything that it should do. There are elements of it I think could be done better, should be elaborated upon when this hits the anime. I don't think it will do that, but at the end of the day, this is about selling a vibe and giving us that feeling of this endless sunshine, endless summers, and then, oh crap, everything's about to start hurting. It does that very well, mechanically does that very well, artistically does that very well. Thumbs up from me, great work. With all that said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, and here we are once again with a comment from Big X1 who says, "This is a good episode, but it is more a calm before the storm kind of deal, given what comes next volume. Thanks for your comment, and from what I could see, that's definitely going to end up being the case." Now, I'll just say that next week is going to be the volume review, where I look at the volume as a whole and give my thoughts and feelings on it. After that, we've got a week before the new My Hero Academia series starts, so that week we'll have a special video out. I've got a few ideas as to what it's going to end up being, but that's a bridge we'll cross when we get there. I will just say that the next few weeks or so are going to be very weird for me, so in terms of work and such, so I'll do my best to continue to do these videos in a timely and professional manner, but until then, until we get into that weird period of time, do the YouTuber stuff, like, forever, subscribe. I know that I've started to say this stuff again, but given how weird YouTube has been recently, I think you can appreciate why I'm having to do this. But in any case, thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!